Hello, I'm Alan Lee. Welcome to our series of election programmes covering issues that we believe are central to the health and well-being of New Zealand families. Now, last week we focused on the care of children, and this week we're discussing how we should be educating those children. We'll be asking whether our politicians get a gold star for doing a good job of administering our current education system, or whether they need to stay behind after class. Well, my guests this week are Dr Stuart Middleton. He's Director of External Relations at Auckland's Manukau Institute of Technology, and teacher and educator David Bell. Well, welcome to both of you. Thank you very much indeed for coming. I'll ask both of you the same question. David, I'll start with you. What's education for? What's the role of education?
What people don't recognise is that it has two very different roles. The first is that of induction into the society around us so that we learn how to live together as a community. And the second is to make people productive within that society.
Stuart?
Well, yes, I'm following on from that. It is about skills. It is about learning the tools that you need to make a contribution to the world and to be able to pick up your responsibilities as in a family group and perhaps even as a leader of a family. And those are the skills of being employable, the skills of being a responsible citizen, and the skills of knowing that learning does not just occur once but will be an ongoing process through the rest of your life.
So it has a very practical outcome. Do you think, David, that the system as it stands is working, is doing that?
The system as it stands is based on the work of Hegel, and his idea was to break things into subjects without connection to real life. In other words, the Hegelian system is designed to not work. And what we need is much more hands-on experience from all levels, from the little children right up through adulthood, right across the spectrum of what we do. And that's social, physical, political, you name it. It's right across our whole personalities.
So how would that work in practice?
Well, if you take a look at mathematics as a subject, we're taught skills of numbers, but we're not taught where to use them. So if you start off with mathematics as how big is this, or how fast or slow is that, until we can relate the numbers to something outside, they have no meaning. There are some games that teach us number skills, and I remember the very first card game I ever learned was cribbage, which is a strange card game to learn, but I was 7, and it taught me number skills big time.
So our system, though, is, I mean, you have one teacher who does one subject, one teacher who does another subject. It's actually, the way the system works tends to put it in silos, doesn't it?
Well, that's especially true of secondary school and tertiary teaching. It's not so true of early childhood and primary teaching, where there is much more integration between what we consider to be subjects or discipline areas, and there's much more relating the one to the other. But I agree with David that being able to relate what's being learnt to the real purposes in the world are what produces successful education. You ask the question, how well are we doing? Well, the answer is in two halves. We're doing really well with some students, and we're doing quite poorly with others. And in fact, it's not an exaggeration to say we're in our kind of education systems, we're about as good as it gets at the top end, and we're about as bad as it gets at the other end. Wow. And that's really the issue that people have to grapple with if this country is going to have a good and sustainable future.
So how do we bring the kids who are down here who aren't getting anything out of the system, how do we close that gap?
Well, I think we have to seriously question what we're doing at both ends of the system too, and the truth's always in the middle of it, isn't it? So we have to find the things which motivate the high-performing students, and find ways of giving that same purpose and motivation to all students. And a lot of it is to do with that magic word purpose, knowing why. And perhaps education is very much focused on the what and the how, and rather less on the why. What David was talking about, the application of the number skills in that. A lot of education is floating in a kind of context-free program, once you get those programs relating closely to life purpose and to futures and to the real world, then I think you see learning really start to bite in. Some students take all of those contexts with them into the school.
Can I chip in? In education, there's what they call left brain, right brain. And right brain is the intellectual, it's the visual, and I think it's much broader than visual. It's, I think, all the senses and all the emotions. And if we ignore right brain, we're ignoring half of the person. Now, some people work almost strictly right brain, some left brain, some integrate. And what we're losing is the capacity to bring those right brain people into the system. Now, for people who are left brain, it's actually very easy to open up right brain, and I teach a process which takes about 3 minutes to teach. And it's very interesting to see the results, because that opens up the creative side of the person. I had an illustration from a school I taught Bible in schools in, and the teacher was onto this and said, how do I teach this, because I don't know it? And I said, well, that's my home territory, let's have a look at it. And I gave the kids a 3-minute exercise that the teacher could duplicate and teach to anybody from age about 6 or 7 upwards, and it worked brilliantly. That class actually produced 5 or 6 articles for their school journal, all from that one class, because they had had some integration right brain, left brain.
What David's describing, they're really important, and the more sophisticated we can become in our understanding of how people learn and the way in which people bring different sets of tools to the task, that's obviously going to make us more efficient. But it is a very complex combination of both those understandings, but also the social context that students are coming from, their previous experiences, the way in which they're able to relate what they're doing to the worlds that they know, and those are very different. And so when you do look at the performance of an education system, it cuts very much along social class lines, it cuts very much along ethnic lines, and that's the huge challenge for New Zealand.
Okay, well, we'll take a quick break there, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes. And welcome back to our discussion on education in the run-up to the election. Joining me are teacher, educator David Bell and Dr Stuart Middleton from Manukau Institute of Technology. Gentlemen, we were talking before the break about the left brain, right brain, and about trying to get that percentage down here who aren't finding that the education system is working for them. During the break, David, you were telling me that we need to start really, really early.
Yeah, well, the real thing that we're missing is the instructions that Moses and Joshua give us, because they say if you want to have a family that's working together, you need to follow some basic rules. And Moses said these are the 10 Commandments. In Deuteronomy, he says that those 10 Commandments are a just and a good and a righteous set of laws. What other nation has laws like these? And then Moses, right through the books of Moses and right through Joshua, we're given the instruction, teach these to your children, hang them up on the walls in your house, write them on your doorposts, carry them on your garments, discuss it when you're out talking and walking with the kids. Make it a part of your everyday activities. And I must confess that as a parent, I did not do that because I did not realise its importance.
I'm a bit more pragmatic and say that it's a big leap of faith to believe that all families can do that without help. And so we have early childhood education systems. In New Zealand, we have very disparate access to early childhood education. So some students have their family things reinforced and helped along by the experiences of more formal early childhood education experiences, but many do not. Now again, that splits along social class, splits along ethnic lines. I mean, there's a whole series of cumulative effects that have produced the spot that we have got to, and which I think is exercising the brains of successive governments about how to get out of it.
There still seems to be this sort of 20% at the bottom, which everyone has known about for years. Why is it that why can't we get the group that we're not addressing, why can't we get it to a point where we are addressing them?
Well,
$64 million question, really, isn't it?
This is the right brain group, and they are the people who need the physical side of education. In very broad terms, they're people who work with their hands. I find that I'm a balance between right brain and left brain, so I'm very happy to go to a piece of wood and feel its texture and have a look at the colour and find out what that wood is like. Then I work out how to work the wood. So it's being able to recognise that this right brain activity has a completely different educational need from left brain, and how do we cater for that? And there are some schools that are doing it. I gather there are about 4 or 5 up the Coromandel, for instance, who cater for right brain. And right brain can be anything from music, dance, art, visualisation. It can be textural. So all of the physical skills tend to be right brain. And we need to cater for that in our education system.
I think it is too simplistic to say if we focused on right brain with that group we would get stunning results. But he does end up in a good spot, I think, with these things where there is no doubt that giving students practical work that relates to the skills and knowledge that they're learning. In other words, the skills and the knowledge are not simply theoretical constructs, but real things that can be applied to real objects and for a purpose. David didn't call them right brain workshops or anything like that. He called them engineering workshops and woodwork rooms and electroplating. Those are related to a long-term future of being an engineer of some kind, or a woodworker, or an electroplater. And I think that vocational focus that David remembers fondly from his schooling, and which was pretty present in New Zealand secondary schools until the late 60s and into the early 70s, was something that did engage a lot of students. Not only that, it helped them to learn their English and their mathematics and their science and all those things that can easily become theoretical if they don't have those practical applications.
So why have we lost those? Why have we lost that aspect of our education system? What's happened?
Well, that's a very long program you've just opened up here. But it is a phenomenon in the entire English-speaking world. The 5 big English-speaking systems in the world have all moved away from that focused secondary school into a much more general academic program, believing that more is better and that everyone would then have the chance to enjoy the fruits of high-quality professional qualifications, and that what it's produced is unprecedented levels of disengagement from education. And I think that education systems in the Western world particularly are now trying to look at how do we get some of those things back. Some of those varied systems like your Scandinavian systems and your German system and things like that, they never left them. They always had that wider range of choice for young people, and so learning was able to continue.
There's a practical illustration from this in Holland, where Philips actually have their own university and their own technical school, and the university caters for the top 10% intellectually. And the technical school is for those who want to become workers in some sort of industry or process. So their technicians actually go not to the university, but to the technical school. And that's 90% of their students.
That's interesting. It's almost like they're looking at what they want to produce at the end.
Yes.
And then working towards that. Let's take another break, and then we'll be back again in a couple of minutes. And welcome back to our discussion on education in the run-up to the election. With me are teacher and educator David Bell and Dr Stuart Middleton from the Manukau Institute of Technology. Is our system too fixated on box ticking? It does seem, I live next door to teachers, and I'm really conscious of the amount of administrative work they seem to do. I mean, are we making it so that teachers spend all their time doing administration and not so much time teaching?
In their teaching, they're spending too much time ticking boxes rather than making sure that students can actually do something. And to me, that's an administrative problem that puts the focus on the wrong thing. the focus should be what can the students do at the end of it. I'm going to bring in something which seems completely outside, and that's actually the book of Leviticus. I read a very interesting article by Professor Morris, and he entitled it Leviticus, Seeing Past the Sins and Sacrifices. And he looked at Leviticus as the way in which we work and live together as individual, family, community, nation. And it's an expanding process so that we come together in unity with that sort of background behind us. And then each person's part within that community becomes productive.
Wow.
I mean, I feel that if those kinds of analyses work in education, they should have started to work by now. They've been around for a while, and so's education. What's happened, I think, there's an element of truth in what you say, because I think the whole education enterprise has become much too complex. That it's not a complex process. It's about taking a learner and changing them from someone who doesn't know A, B, C or D or whatever, and turning them to someone who does know that. Now, all of the stuff David's mentioning is relevant to that process, but I think that by and large teachers are in a kind of treadmill of keeping grinding on. It's year 11, year 12, year 13 students. It's not about readiness. It's not about progress of individuals. It's about a program that's here and then follows the program. It's about those assessments that must be fitted in to that program. It's not about that student is telling us that they know that. Let's see if they do, and let's see if we can now build on that, because this would be the next thing that they would go on to learn. And I think that teachers are better than box tickers, you know. Yeah. They do have a huge knowledge, and the gifted teachers are just stunning and as good as they are anywhere in the world. But I don't think they get to do what they do best for enough time.
Now, for the students, there's one area that's concerned me probably for 20 years now, and it's something that I had to deal with when I was teaching. For instance, supervision. How does a supervisor work? How do you make a supervisor more effective? And something that we need to do in education is give people the right to make mistakes without being hurt by them, the right to make mistakes in safety. And until we can find an education system that allows mistakes and then allows people to work through and correct them either with or without help, it doesn't really matter which, we're failing completely.
I remember that the subjects I was best at turned out to be the subjects that had the passionate teacher. I mean, I went into engineering because my physics teacher, Mrs. Agar, I love her to this day, Mrs. Agar was the most enthusiastic, feisty, excited teacher you could meet. And you'd come in and she'd say, right, we're doing optics. And you'd think, optics. And by the time you'd finished, you would be buzzing as well. And it's almost like we've taken out that human element.
Well, I don't think we should despair about that. I think that enthusiasm and that igniting kind of zeal for learning within an area is still there in many, many classrooms. And I mean, let's not lose sight. Many young people are doing very, very well in our education system, and that's often the result of outstanding teaching. And many students who aren't doing well have still got outstanding teachers there, but they're working against a whole lot of things that don't get those students to the same end result. And I don't think you were driven just by teacher zeal. I mean, I think that early somewhere you discovered some passion within your own thinking and in your own heart about what you really wanted to be doing. And I think a good teacher is able to know that Alan wants to do more of that and lead you to the place where you can get on with it. And because really successful learners are really quite self-sustaining and really develop a lot of independence as learners. And I guess that's really the mark of those very successful people that go on, say, post-secondary into tertiary education and do stunningly well, where a good deal of independence is required of them.
Can I go back to Hegel's philosophy in education? And it all started out when Frederick the Great went to the philosophers of his day and said, I want people who can follow complex orders but won't ask why. And that's a very serious statement, because that is where the subject approach to education arose, so that people take a look at the Nuremberg trials, the number of people who were on trial and said, I was following orders. And we're finding exactly the same excuse today in moral and social situations where people are following orders, and that is their excuse because they have never learned to ask what's behind it. And that what's behind it is our process. Why do we do it? How do we make it work? And that's what we, in broad terms, it's what we're missing in our education system. It's there in some places it's brilliant. But in most places, it depends on the individual teacher.
We're going to have politicians knocking on our doors over the coming weeks as the election draws closer. If you could say to the Prime Minister who rocks up at your door, say, right, I want you to change one thing about our education system, where would you start? Where would you tell the Prime Minister to start?
Give every family a copy of the 10 Commandments and get them to work through it with their small kids, because that is where our society starts from. That's where our values come from. And our education follows our values and our processes from that. So that is where I would start. That would be the key to everything for me.
Stuart?
Well, I mean, I would say necessary but not sufficient. And I don't think I'd discuss Hegel with a politician knocking on the door either. I mean, I think that it is about saying, how can you assure me that the education system will give to my children or our family or the family of the people next door a future? How will it equip them to go through seamlessly into employment? How will it go through and leave them with a set of skills that enable them to express high levels of social responsibility, a willingness to contribute, a willingness to show leadership and compassion and all those values which our society would say we subscribe to, but which we don't practice perhaps to the extent we do. All of those things can be achieved by a good education system, of course supported by the things that families and other institutions in the community bring to the process.
Something that Stuart has emphasised, and I would wholeheartedly agree with this, we need to teach people skills. We need a much broader set, looking at the whole person, because education is about the whole person, not just about one aspect of them.
But you're more likely to become whole if you can read and write.
Yes, definitely.
And if you can manage your maths. And if you can do all of those basic things. And I think sometimes you can get lost in those big high-level things, and people are coming in underneath without really the things that really matter. If you can read and write to a good, high, competent level, you can do anything. And I think I'd be asking a politician, do they understand the demographics of New Zealand? Do they understand how they are now? Do they understand how they're going to be in 30 years' time? Because that will be a key determiner of whether the education system's performing.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed. It's a fascinating subject. We could be here all night, but I think the next programme will be along shortly. Thank you. That's all we've time for this week. Our thanks to David Bell and Stuart Middleton for joining us. Until next week, from all of us here, bye for now. Hei kona mai.